new reign is here. A CFF pioneer has returned. Your premier CFF resource. Secure your new reign. College Fantasy Reign. Your CFF reign starts here.
Welcome, everyone, to the brand new College Fantasy Reign podcast. My name is Joe Arpazi, and I started my CFF work all the way back in 2008. After stepping away for 8 years, I returned in 2024. You can find all of my content at collegefantasyreign.com. That is spelled R-E-I-G-N. You can also follow the podcast on YouTube and Spotify, and I highly recommend that you follow me on X. My new X handle is at CFRJoe, and this is week 14, fellas. It is time to grab yourself a fantasy championship. One of the things that I am doing this entire week because of my awesome community, I am giving out all of my week 14 content, absolutely no paywall. Everything is for free. If you've been a free subscriber all year and you've made it to your championship game, I want to give you the premium subscriber experience. If you are someone who is not a subscriber to my website, maybe you've listened to the podcast once or twice, maybe you've seen some of my tweets, this is a great time to go check out everything that I have to offer on the site. And I also did a rebranding on last week's show. It was the premiere of the new name here. College Fantasy Reign was formerly Let Purple Reign, that is now retired, and all of the new links to the podcast, to my X, to the website, everything is included and updated now, guys. So moving forward, it is going to be College Fantasy Reign, and we are going to start some things off very quickly here, going over the two leagues that I have been recapping here for the playoffs. The first one is a league that I have been hosting, the 2025 Battle for the Belt 52-Man League Challenge. This event's sponsor has been ARM Championship Belts. For those of you watching on YouTube, they designed this custom championship belt that is going to be going to the eventual champion. And the matchup here, we have one of our special guest contestants, John McKechnie from RotoWire. He has made it to the final, and he is going up against Syracuse Sharks, who has had one of the toughest, most competitive teams all year long. For either of you guys, if you are watching here, whoever wins, I will reach out to you guys to get your mailing address and everything so I can send you that belt. And the last league that we are going into here is the Kings Classic. This is the Premier League with a bunch of CFF analysts from all across the internet here. Just to do a quick rundown of some of the websites that have analysts that are all participating. We have Campus to Canton, CFF Lists, Chasing the Natty Podcast, Draft Sharks, Fantasy and Frames, Fantasy Points, NBC Sports, The Gridiron Scholar, Player Profiler, College Fantasy Reign, Rookie Big Board, RotoWire, the CFF site, and Tom Harvey Sports. And I flubbed it up, guys. I was taking on one of my old partners here, John Lobb, last week. I started Gunnar Stockton instead of Drew Mestamaker, and that single thing cost me my matchup. So John Lobb has advanced to the championship, and he is going up against Steve from RotoWire. Good luck to both of you guys here. And something that's a little different here this week. YouTube and Spotify will be the home of my Start 6 suggestions of the week and the user-submitted questions. Normally, the user-submitted questions are a second video that you can find on the article on my website, but because everything's being done for free with no paywall, you guys are getting the submitted questions and my picks together in one show, both on YouTube and on Spotify. And now that I've gotten all that out of the way, let's dive into some college fantasy football. I am going to take a sip of my water before we jump into the quarterbacks. Very quick rundown for those of you that might be new, stumbling upon my work in week 14. For my picks, I'm going to go over 3 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 3 receivers, and 2 tight ends. I will go over where I have them in my weekly rankings, what the Vegas line is that they think their team will score in terms of points. I will go over my fantasy matchup grade. This is a formula that I use where I take team stats, I apply fantasy points to them, I re-rank all the offenses and defenses based on fantasy points scored or allowed, and then when I compare those rankings, I have a formula that generates a fantasy matchup grade. I will go over that as well as a couple of other advanced stats. For those of you listening on Spotify, I will let you know whether or not something is really good, average, kind of bad, or really bad. But for those of you watching on YouTube, I like to color code things. It makes it easier. So dark green is really good, light green's kind of good, black is average, light red is kind of bad, and dark red is really bad. And let's kick things off here with Brandon Lewis from Memphis. He is taking on Navy. And right now, Vegas is looking for Memphis to score 32.5 points. That is something that I would consider pretty good. And he's got a number of other pretty good things here with this matchup. His fantasy matchup grade is a B+. I like that. The Navy defense is giving up 1.8 passing touchdowns per game, and they are giving up touchdowns in the red zone 61.5% of the time. The best thing about this matchup here is that Navy is giving up 8.6 yards per pass attempt. That is really good here, guys. This is a really good matchup, one where I put Brandon Lewis up as my quarterback 21 this week. I think he is definitely a solid play. He's not one of the guys toward the top of my rankings, but I think you can feel safe putting him in your lineup here. So I'm going to say Brandon Lewis, Memphis, Start Em. Excuse me here, guys. I'm going to take a sip of water. Weather got really cold last night in Indianapolis, and I'm just giving me a bit of a dry throat here. Next up, I'm going to go over Bryson Barnes from Utah State. He is taking on Boise State. And for his stats, I put in... Oh, excuse me, I'll take that back. This is the passing numbers as well. With Bryson Barnes and Utah State, Vegas is thinking that Utah State will put up 26 points against Boise State. That I would call average. Another average thing here is the fantasy matchup grade, which came out to a C. There is one good thing going for Barnes. If Utah State does get down in the red zone, Boise State is giving up touchdowns down there 75.7% of the time. But there are two bad matchup advanced stats here. The first one, Boise gives up 1.1 passing touchdowns per game. That's kind of bad. And they're only giving up 6 yards per pass attempt. That is also kind of bad. When I looked at these kind of bad stats and the average matchup grade and the Vegas line, I put Barnes as my QB 50. He also has not been overly hot lately. So I don't know how many opportunities he's going to get to go down in the red zone and take advantage of that nice red zone touchdown conversion rate that Boise gives up. So here I'm going to say Bryson Barnes, Utah State, sit 'em. My last one here, I wanted to cover because I think some people might be looking in this one like it could be a pretty good matchup, and I'm kind of leaning the other way, guys. This right here is going to be Darian Mensah, Duke, taking on what has now started to become a pesky Wake Forest defense. I have Mensah ranked as my QB 55 this week. I have him down the board quite a ways. And I'd say the best things going for Mensah in this matchup, my fantasy matchup grade came out to a B, so it's not bad, but I think a lot of that has to do with how well Duke is throwing the ball. But there's a lot of the advanced stats that I don't like here in this one. First things up, Wake Forest gives up 0.8 passing touchdowns per game, and they give up touchdowns in the red zone only 43.9% of the time. Both of those advanced stats are pretty bad. The really bad advanced stat in this one is that Wake Forest is only giving up 5.4 yards per pass attempt. I really do not like that. Vegas thinks that Duke will score 29 points here. I'm not much of a line guy, so anytime if I'm saying if I think a team might score some points or not, don't take it as betting advice, guys. I don't do betting lines. But this is just one. I feel like the passing game might be down. Maybe the ground game carries a little more of the workload in this one. I think out of caution, you need to take Darian Mensah, Duke, and sit him. I'm going to do another sip of water before we dive into the running backs. Okay. First up, Keyshawn Owens, FIU. he gets an awful Sam Houston defense. And Vegas agrees with how bad Sam Houston is. They're projecting Florida International to score 31 points. That is in the pretty good range. One other pretty good advanced stat that I like here. Sam Houston State gives up touchdowns in the red zone 64.2% of the time. Now, everything else here with this game is a really good matchup. Okay, guys? The fantasy matchup grade is an A. Sam Houston State gives up 2.6 rushing touchdowns per game, and they give up 5.2 rushing yards per attempt. I have Owens all the way up as my running back 8 this week. I am all aboard the Owens train in week 14, so I'm going to say Keyshawn Owens, FIU, start him. Next one here is someone who I thought would be able to perform pretty well last week, and he had a down week, and that is Jordan Simmons, Georgia State. This week, he has Old Dominion, and this is not a good matchup, my friends. This matchup scares me off so much that I pushed Simmons down all the way to running back 87 for the week. Vegas is calling on Georgia State to only score 16 points. That is really bad. And the fantasy matchup grade in this one is a D+. That's kind of bad, right on the edge of being average with a C-. And Old Dominion is only giving up 1.2 rushing touchdowns per game. That's also kind of bad. Things start to get a little bit better with these advanced stats. Old Dominion giving up touchdowns in the red zone 58.8% of the time is an average advanced stat. And one pretty good stat here for this one for Simmons is that Old Dominion gives up 3.8 yards per carry. I don't think the yards per carry are going to do enough to help Simmons' fantasy value. When I look at this fantasy matchup grade, when I look at the low rushing touchdowns allowed, and then you combine that with the Vegas line of 16 points, I think it's just really smart that you take Jordan Simmons, Georgia State, sit him. My last guy here is Jamari Taylor from Virginia. I really like this matchup. He's coming off of a bye week. He has been the workhorse for this Virginia running game. Vegas thinks Virginia is going to put up 31.5 points on Virginia Tech. That is in the pretty good category. Other items that are pretty good in this matchup. Virginia Tech gives up 2.1 rushing touchdowns per game. They give up touchdowns in the red zone 67.4% of the time, and they give up 4.3 yards per carry. The best part about this matchup is the matchup grade. It came out to an A- in this one, which is really good here, guys. If you've been hanging on to Jamari Taylor, or if you were smart and picked him up because someone dropped him for the bye week, man, get him in your lineup. Jamari Taylor, Virginia, big time stardom. Going to do another sip of water before we dive into the wide receivers. I'm going to start things off with CJ Williams. I did it again, guys. I did this last week, and I just noticed I did it again here. All right. I am just going to do it on the fly, guys. Why not? Bear with me. I'm going to move back to the running backs, and I'm going to fix that stupid graphic mistake that I made, guys. Really dumb by me. I can't believe I've done it 2 weeks in a row now. So bear with me. I'm going to do this really fast on the fly. It may not be totally pretty and perfect, but we'll see here. Don't mind my clicking while I'm getting this all saved up for you. All right. Let me close that out. Let me come back over to the program that I am running the show through, and let's go back to wide receivers here. Boom, it's fixed. CJ Williams plays for Stanford, not Notre Dame. CJ Williams from Stanford is taking on Notre Dame this week. Vegas does not like Stanford in this one at all. Vegas is calling on Stanford to only score 10 points. That is really, really bad. One frickin' touchdown. There's a bunch of pretty bad matchup stats here. The fantasy matchup grade is a D+. Notre Dame only gives up 1.1 passing touchdowns per game. Excuse me. And they give up 6.3 yards per pass attempt. The only average thing going in this matchup is Notre Dame gives up touchdowns in the red zone 52.2% of the time. I think it might be a challenge for Stanford to get down in the red zone, so I'm ignoring that advanced stat. And when I did my rankings here, I put CJ Williams as my wide receiver 98. He's a guy I was literally thinking if you had him, and I did this in one of my leagues, I just dropped him, period, let alone to bench him. I went and just grabbed any other receiver that was good on the waiver wire. Even if I didn't need him, I did it as a defensive play. So I would throw a suggestion out there for you guys. If you have CJ Williams, if you can look, if there's still some of these good wide receivers that are available that you can just pick up for free right now, I would drop Williams and just pick up the best one you can so your opponent cannot use him. But here, CJ Williams, Stanford, I'm going to say sit him, and I'm going to take another drink of water. Developing a little bit of a bullfrog there. All right. The next one kind of seems like an easy sit, in my opinion. Chase Hendricks, Ohio. He has been down quite a bit the last several weeks. I have him as my wide receiver 88. So I just don't see much improvement happening here. I'm going to do this one very quickly. Like, if Chase is going to come out of this slump, you need a really good matchup. There's a bunch of average stats, and then the one thing that's below average that's kind of bad is the fantasy matchup grade, which is a D+, with this game that he has against Buffalo. But everything from the Vegas line, defensive, like passing touchdowns allowed per game, red zone touchdown conversion rate, yards per pass attempt, they're all average. I don't see enough here for Hendricks to have a get-out-of-a-slump performance. I think it would just take like a Superman performance. So very quickly, I'm just going to say Chase Hendricks, Ohio, sit him. Last guy here is Shelton Sampson, Louisiana Lafayette, taking on Louisiana Monroe. Sampson was on fire for several weeks in a row, and then he just kind of had a dud last week. And the interesting thing, when I was looking over his numbers, Sampson still had his regular workload of targets. It wasn't like it didn't look like he was hurt. Didn't look like somebody else stole all the targets away. He just wasn't productive last week. I believe that this matchup is good enough that he will have a bounce back game, and he is absolutely worth putting in your lineup. I believe it so much I made him my wide receiver 6 for the week. Things that there's only one thing that's average in this whole matchup, and that is the fantasy matchup grade, which came out to a C+. But everything else is pretty good here. Vegas is calling on Louisiana to score 30 points. Louisiana Monroe is giving up almost 2 passing touchdowns per game. They give up touchdowns in the red zone 60.4% of the time, and they give up 7.8 yards per pass attempt. I love all of these things for this matchup. I'm going to say Shelton Sampson, Louisiana Lafayette, start 'em. Let's dive into these 2 tight ends here. I picked 2 names that I think would be interesting for this week. And I also wanted to try and hit guys from a Power 4 conference here. I do get a lot of readers that are in Power 4 only leagues, and I know it can be slim pickings. But I'm going to start off with, I misspelled his name, Max Clare from Ohio State taking on Michigan. And this one I think is interesting here. At this time, last that I checked before filming, both of Ohio State's top receivers are seen as questionable this week. Do not know if we're going to see them play in the game. This is a tough matchup. I do like that Vegas is calling on Ohio State to score 27.5 points. The big thing that I'm looking at that I like about Clare is a twofold. Injuries to the main wide receivers means the ball is going to have to get distributed elsewhere. I think that'll be good for Clare. The other thing that I like is that in tough games, tight ends tend to be featured more than in easy games and easy matchups. The surprising thing here, this Michigan State pass defense is pretty good. They only give up 1.1 passing touchdowns allowed per game. They only give up 6.3 yards per pass attempt. Both of those things are pretty bad for a matchup. The red zone touchdown conversion rate is about 53%, which is about average. But the interesting thing is that my fantasy matchup grade formula still kicked out a B+ for Ohio State here. So that's something I really do like. It's like the one positive or above average thing with this matchup. But the injuries and then having a tough matchup and the way that tight ends tend to be utilized more, I think Clare is going to have a better day than you think. I'm not going to call him great. But I did rank him as high as my tight end 6 this week. So Max Clare, Ohio State, start him. The next guy here, he had a good game last week against Oregon, and that is Lake McCree, USC. He is taking on crosstown rival UCLA, and Vegas really likes UCLA or USC in this one. They're calling on the Trojans to score 40.5 points. That is really good, folks. And another really good stat here for this game is that UCLA gives up touchdowns in the red zone 75% of the time. Some pretty good advanced stats. The fantasy matchup grade came out to a B+ here, and UCLA gives up almost 2 passing touchdowns per game, as well as an average 7.1 yards allowed per pass attempt. But here's where I'm going to pump the brakes, folks. What I was saying about Claire in the Ohio State-Michigan game, I'm going to say here in the opposite manner. When you look at McCree's games where he tends to do good, they are tough, competitive games. You typically do not see him hit 8 fantasy points in games where the Trojans are blowing out their opponents. That's what I suspect will happen here. So this is something where you have a guy who recently did good. You have a really good matchup. I don't think he will be terrible, guys, but there's a chance that he maybe only gets like 3 targets the whole game. So out of caution, I'm going to recommend Lake McCree, USC, sit 'em. All right, guys, I am going to take another sip of water before we start diving into your submitted questions. As I stated before, when I normally do this is a second video that is exclusively on collegefantasyrain.com. Now, this week, it is going to be included here on the free podcast version because I am having no paywalls for championship week. I say it, my commitment is to help you win a fantasy championship this year, and I got several people asking me questions to help them get that championship. And I'm going to start out here with Noah from Substack, and he's asking me to pick 2 quarterbacks. This is a 4-point passing touchdown league. He is asking me to choose from Haynes King, Georgia Tech taking on Georgia, Carlos Del Rio Wilson, Marshall taking on Georgia Southern, and Roman Gagliano, Middle Tennessee taking on New Mexico State. And with this, what we basically have to do is eliminate one person since they're asking me to take 2. And a lot of these questions are that way, guys. And one of the interesting things here is that if you're watching on YouTube and you just look at the colors that I have on the screen for the advanced stats, you would think that Haynes King is automatically the guy that needs to be cut. He's the only guy that has anything bad. He has a lot of average. There's a lot of green here. Good stuff for the other guys. But I want to kind of walk through the thought process. The first thing I'm going to kind of throw out there is I'm going to do a process of elimination. So I'm going to start with the 2 guys that I ranked the highest in my rankings this week. Carlos Del Rio Wilson, I ranked him my quarterback 10, and Gagliano, I ranked him my quarterback 12. Both these guys I have very close to one another. Del Rio Wilson, I gave him the edge in the rankings because he's been more productive over the last 3 weeks. I always give credit to that in my rankings. One thing that's different here is that the advanced stats I'm going to go over for Del Rio Wilson are all rushing based. The other 2 quarterbacks, they are passing based. For Del Rio Wilson this week, he needs to get the production on the ground. The ground game has a way better matchup compared to the passing game. And with Vegas calling on Marshall to only score 24 points, it means that the scoring opportunities are going to be limited here. So he's going to be fighting the running backs, hoping he can maybe get a rushing touchdown and then some complementary passing yards. But the rushing side of things, the matchup grade is an A+. Georgia Southern gives up 3 rushing touchdowns per game, and they give up 5.7 yards per rush. Del Rio Wilson will be able to tap into some of that here. The thing that when I look at these 2, if I was just kind of thinking about things, the Vegas line scares me off a little bit, and the fact that the passing matchup is not nearly as good. So you're kind of really hoping on one side of Del Rio Wilson's game to give you the fantasy production you need this week. With Gagliano, he can still run, but the majority of his fantasy value is going to come from the passing game. Vegas likes Middle Tennessee State to score 39 points. That is an amazing matchup stat here. Another amazing matchup stat is the fantasy matchup grade, which came out to an A. There's one pretty good advanced stat here, which is New Mexico State gives up 2 passing touchdowns per game. The other things that are in play are average. New Mexico State giving up touchdowns in the red zone 59.4% of the time and giving up 7.1 yards per pass attempt. One thing I say all the time, guys, average is not bad. It is just average. You can still have a fantasy productive day if there's average advanced stats here. But with Gagliano, I think I like his matchup more than Del Rio Wilson because the passing game isn't as strong, and I really like that Vegas line, and the rushing matchup for Middle Tennessee is not as good. So I do not see Middleton dominating a lot of scores on the ground, which should allow the passing game to get its fair share, whereas my worry with Del Rio Wilson is that it's going to be the ground game dominating the scoring. The passing game is going to be very limited. And so when I did my rankings, it's just one of those tough things where I'm trying to juggle how reliable someone has been over 3 weeks, how risky are they with the lack of production or the Vegas lines and the overall matchup. So it's always a juggling act. So even though I gave Del Rio Wilson a slight edge, my favorite guy, the first guy I tell you to pick would be Gagliano here, okay? I'm just kind of all in on Gagliano this week, and that leaves us with King and Del Rio Wilson, and they're still ranked pretty close to one another. I have King ranked 17, and Vegas thinks that Georgia Tech will score 23 points, with Marshall having 24. So they're really similar so far as we go down the road. The difficult thing is that almost everything is average here for Kings in the passing matchup. C+ fantasy matchup grade. Georgia giving up touchdowns in the red zone 58.6% of the time and giving up 6.6 yards per pass attempt. The one kind of bad stat, Georgia only gives up 1 passing touchdown per game. King will probably have to grind the ball down into the red zone and then run it in. So I'm not too overly worried on that. And so even though we have a bunch of average stats, we have a low Vegas line, I still rank King highly because he has been super productive the last handful of weeks. I think this is just kind of a tough choice here for you, Noah. With the last pick, what I'm going to say is King, it might be your safest floor option because we know we've seen him be productive. Actually, I'm going to look this up because I don't have it memorized. I don't remember where the game is. So let me peek very quickly here. I did not check that before doing this, and I don't write a script or anything when I'm doing the reviews of these matchups, guys. I'm giving my honest feedback and opinion based on these stats. And it's, let's see here. It's at home. Okay. So he does not have to play at Georgia. That was a big thing I wanted to double check for you here. So one of my thoughts is that King might be your safest floor option with a limited ceiling. Del Rio Wilson might, he could still take off, and I think he has a better potential fantasy ceiling, but I don't know how low his floor could be this week. So this is going to come down to one of those things of, I think you need to look at your opponent, just try and decide, do I need to take on extra risk? Is it okay for me to risk a low floor because I need that high ceiling? Or do you want to play it safe because you're really strong in other areas in your starting lineup? If you're strong and you want to play it safe, I'm going to recommend Haynes King as your second one. If you need to take on that risk and shoot for upside, then I'd say roll with Del Rio Wilson. All right. Our second question comes from Chris Sallow on Substack. He is asking me to pick one of these 3 wide running backs. First one is Nick Singleton, Penn State taking on Rutgers. Nate Shepard, Duke taking on Wake Forest. And Demon Claiborne, Wake Forest taking on Duke. The first thing I'm going to do very quickly, since we are picking one, is that I am going to eliminate Nate Shepard. Just look down the line of everything that I'm about to go through here. He doesn't come close to these other two. I have Shepard ranked my running back 90. I mentioned before, Vegas is calling on Duke to score 29 points in this game. My fantasy matchup grade is a C-, which is average. Wake Forest gives up 3.5 yards per rushing attempt. That is also average. Some kind of bad advanced stats is Wake Forest giving up 1.1 rushing touchdowns per game and giving up touchdowns in the red zone just under 44% of the time. He doesn't come close. We're going to knock him aside, Chris. That leaves us with Singleton and Claiborne. And this is a really good question because there's some things that are really similar between the two. I have Claiborne ranked 28th, Singleton ranked 29th, so I put them right next to each other. The Vegas line advantage goes to Singleton. They think Penn State's going to score 33.5 points versus Wake Forest scoring 26. So we got a pretty good advanced stat for Penn State, an average one for Wake Forest. The fantasy matchup grade is on the high end of pretty good for Claiborne with a B+, while Singleton gets an A. Both of them are really close for rushing touchdowns allowed. Rutgers is giving up 2 rushing touchdowns per game, while Duke is giving up 2.2. The red zone touchdown conversion rate is really dang similar. Rutgers giving up those touchdowns 72.7% of the time, and Duke giving them up 71.1% of the time. Singleton gets the distinctive edge when it comes to rushing yards per carry allowed. Rutgers giving up 6.5 yards, Duke giving up 4.1. So, why did I rank Claiborne higher by 1 spot than Singleton when Singleton has the advantage in Vegas line, fantasy matchup grade, and yards per carry? The big reason is he is splitting time in that backfield, and Katron Allen is really, in my opinion, like the top rushing guy. So that scares me off a little bit here with Singleton. He should still have a good day, and that's why I have him so close to Claiborne here, is I think they're both going to be really good. But the worry I have is that I don't know how high Singleton's ceiling is going to be, and the only way I see him really, I think, potentially having a better ceiling than Claiborne is him busting big plays. Now, he has the ability to do that. Rutgers is a team that he can take advantage of to hit some really long ones, but I think that's the one thing that kind of would give Singleton the edge over Claiborne. Claiborne's going to have a better workload. You have a rivalry game as well. Even though the passing game's really been clicking lately for Wake Forest, Claiborne's still involved. I think I really like this offense in this game. I'm going to disagree with Vegas here. I think Wake Forest could score more than 26. I think Claiborne is still my guy to give you as the single suggestion. I think he's a better floor player that still has good ceiling potential. And I wouldn't risk a potentially higher ceiling in Singleton when the floor for Claiborne I do think is better, and it's not that bad of a ceiling for him. So, Chris, I'm going to say roll with Claiborne, but even if you decide to throw Singleton in there, I don't think he's going to have a bad day either. The next question comes from Trevor on Substack. He is asking me to pick 2 wide receivers or cut one. This is a full PPR league. He's looking at Malachi Toney, Miami against Pitt, Keyshawn Singleton, South Florida versus Rice, Jackson Harris, Hawaii versus Wyoming. Trevor, if you're watching on YouTube, you're going to know already who I'm going to tell you to cut. But for everybody listening, I'm still going to go through a full analysis and review here. When you look at player rankings, just as we start to go through this, I gave Singleton the edge. He's my number 7 receiver. Then I went Malachi Toney at number 12, Jackson Harris at 18. Purely by my rankings, they're grouped pretty closely, but I gave Singleton the big edge there. The reasons why I'm giving Singleton the edge. Number 1, this offense is red hot, and they probably have the best fantasy quarterback in the country right now. So I love the Vegas line of 43.5 points. That is really, really good. The fantasy matchup grade of an A- is really good, and Rice gives up touchdowns in the red zone 74.2% of the time, which is also really good. Rice is giving up 8.2 yards per pass attempt. That is way better than Toney or Harris. Toney, in his matchup, Pitt's only giving up 6.8 yards. Wyoming's giving up 5.7. Rice is giving up 8.2. So between the Vegas line, the yards allowed per attempt, I really love Singleton. He's the first one I'm going to tell you, lock in your lineup. I think you absolutely need to play him here. And so it leaves us with Toney and Harris, who once again I have ranked 12th and 18th. The Vegas lines are really close between these two. Miami expected to score 28.5. Hawaii expected to score 27.5, but that's where the closeness in these comparisons ends. Tony's fantasy matchup grade is an A compared to a B minus for Jackson Harris. Wyoming they can be a little stingy. That B minus, I think, probably is pretty accurate for this matchup. The one thing that worries me with Miami in a lot of these games is sometimes we just don't know. Like, are they going to really, really throw the ball, or do they just like shut down the offense once they have a lead and grind it out? That uncertainty is one of those things that made me drop Tony down, despite the fact he had an awesome week last week. You're always going to take on that risk. And this year, this really, in my opinion, been the way Tony is. Tony has such a wide swing of fantasy scores he can give you because they might get conservative in the offense or they feed him the ball and he explodes. You'd think they should just feed him the ball every week, but that coaching staff doesn't. But going through these other matchups here, defensive passing touchdowns allowed per game. Pitt giving up 2, Wyoming giving up 1.2, so that advantage goes to Tony as well. Red zone touchdown conversion rate, Pitt gives up touchdowns down there 71% of the time, which is really good. Wyoming gives them up 53.3% of the time, which is average. So once again, Tony has that the leg up there. And I mentioned the yards per pass attempt. Tony has the advantage there, 6.8 yards versus 5.7, which is really bad, folks. I have Harrison still ranked highly at 18, mainly honoring what he's doing. He is what the entire offense, passing game, flows through him. So I have to kind of give some credit there. But I'm not very high on Harris. I would really tell people if you have other options, even if I maybe have them ranked a little bit lower, I kind of like maybe sitting Harris on the cautious side. So even though Tony's got that risk that they might get really conservative in the offense, I think Tony's your second guy. So I'm going to tell you, Trevor, roll with Malachi Tony and Keyshawn Singleton. I am going to take a sip of water before I get to Brandon's question. All right. Brandon asked me on Substack we have, once again, pick 2 wide receivers or cut 1, full PPR league. He has Trey Richardson, Vanderbilt taking on Tennessee. Donovan Foppel, I don't know exactly how you say his name, and I stink at names, guys. Any of you that watch regularly know that. Donovan Foppel, New Mexico State versus Middle Tennessee. And Josh Cameron, Baylor taking on Houston. Going through the rankings, I have Trey Richardson with a very ambitious wide receiver 2. I want to explain one thing to you guys. When I go through and I do my player rankings, I will start things off by, I have all the players, like they're in a list of alphabetical order by the school name, by what their fantasy points have been over the last 3 weeks. And I just start by kind of placing them in tiers. And the reasoning behind the tiers doesn't matter. It's just something that helps me just kind of on the fly. What kind of grouping do I think this person should kind of go into? And like a tier 1, there might only be a couple guys that I put in a tier 1. But like a Jeremiah Smith almost every week goes in a tier 1. Danny Scudero for a long time was going in tier 1. This week I had no tier 1 wide receivers. I did not feel like anyone was really good enough to put in there. And instead there's kind of a much bigger batch of tier 2 guys. And so Richardson was a guy I'm kind of viewing as above average of like what you would hope to get out of a starting receiver in your lineup. That's kind of what I view like my tier 3 as. Who's a guy who's going to give me what I'm hoping to get 15 to 20 points? That's what I would call a tier 3 guy. And then my tier 2 guys are who do I think will do a little bit better than that? And then the elite tier 1 guys. So Richardson being my wide receiver 2, it's kind of a process of elimination. Don't really have any tier 1 guys. And then kind of going through how guys have been the last 3 weeks and the matchups. So I'm going to admit, very ambitious for me to put Trey Richardson at number 2, but I just want to give you guys a little bit of that thought process. Like Fappel here, I have him as wide receiver 11. He's in that chunk of tier 2 guys that I see this week. So both of them got really pushed up. Josh Cameron is down at wide receiver 28. So he's an obvious guy that stands out here. I will just I'm still going to go through the full analysis, but this time I'm going to do a little different. I'm going to start off, Brandon, by saying I think Cameron is the guy you need to sit. He's obviously way lower than everyone else in my rankings. He's still not bad at 28. I do want to say that. Vegas is calling on Baylor to score 32 points. My gut tells me that might be a little high. I mean, I could see them maybe 29, 28 points. Once again, I'm not a line betting guy. Don't put any money on that. But the one thing I did like, though, Vegas is calling on that 32 points, which is right in line with Richardson and Faupel. So I really didn't knock Cameron for that. And he does have a pretty good fantasy matchup grade as a B. The other two guys are just way better. They're in the A categories. So those are like the positive things I look at with Cameron. He does have two average things. Houston giving up touchdowns in the red zone 50% of the time and giving up 6.9 yards per pass attempt. That Houston pass attempt number, 6.9 yards, is really close to what Tennessee gives up. They give up 7.2%. So it's one of those things where I say sometimes there's average stats that can still be good. So that's kind of where I'm viewing that as well. I don't like the 1.1 passing touchdowns per game. So Cameron's one of those guys, like I kind of have him. I'm a bit more cautious on him this week. I did still bump him up in the rankings a little bit because he has been productive over the last 3 weeks. He's like that obvious one I would tell you to sit. And the interesting thing here, when you look at the next two, I have Richardson ranked way higher than Faupel. I have more confidence in Richardson, and I wrote up in the waiver wire targets article, like Faupel gives the appearance like his production goes up and down, but he's been fairly productive over the last 5 weeks, and he's got the best of all the matchups here. Vegas line of 29.5 points. Richardson got 31. So I'm calling that even in my eyes. He has an A- fantasy matchup grade versus Richardson's A. Those are both really good, but every other advanced stat here is really good for Faupel. Middle Tennessee giving up 2.6 passing touchdowns per game, giving up touchdowns in the red zone 70% of the time, and giving up 8.4 yards per pass attempt. I think Faupel's a great play, guys. He's a guy who's probably still sitting out there. You could grab. When I was mentioning getting rid of C.J. Williams from Stanford, like I'll tell you guys, this is someone to go look for and see if he's still available. Go grab him. But with Trey Richardson, I did give him an edge in my player rankings. I just feel a little safer. He's more of the big play guy of the two Vanderbilt receivers versus Junior Sherrill. That's why I picked him. And even though Junior Sherrill's been the better receiver over the course of the year, Richardson has been the more fantasy productive over the last 3 weeks. So I do like the touchdowns in the red zone. Maybe that'll benefit Richardson. It's at 77.1% of the time, which is really good. But he might just be more of the home run threat. And I think Vanderbilt's just going to grip it and rip it this week because they're pushing to try and earn respect and squeak their way into the playoffs. So that's one reason why I gave Richardson the edge. I like both of them. I mean, you could kind of view them equally when you look at these advanced stats. So Brandon, Richardson, Faupel, I think those are the obvious guys. Get those two in your lineup. All right, I'm going to take another sip of water, and we have 2 questions left. This one comes from Andrew Biersey. We had connected on Reddit. I don't put a thread out on Reddit for questions, but he used to write for my original website, College Football Geek. We just happened to run across each other in Reddit, and he sent me a DM. He had a question. I told him I'd get it on the show here, and he is asking me to pick one out of these 2 receivers in a full PPR league. He has Iverson Hooks, UAB, taking on Tulsa, and Danny Scudero, San Jose State, taking on Fresno State. I think this one's very obvious, and I'll just start with I'm gonna ignore my rankings, save it for last. So those of you listening on Spotify, build a little more suspense, even though I think it's easy. But just kind of looking at some of the comparisons here. UAB is expected to score 25 points. San Jose State 23. Both of those pretty even, okay? And their average matchup stats. Other average matchup stats here. Tulsa's defense is giving up 1.7 passing touchdowns. Fresno State's giving up 1.6. So far, this is kind of a scratch between the two. They're pretty even. Hooks has been more productive over the last 3 weeks compared to Scudero. The quarterback situation at San Jose State scares me off. I believe Eggett is not playing this week, or he's doubtful to play. I don't remember what the most recent player news is off the top of my head. That scares me off a bit for Scudero. While as UAB's playing fairly well here. The fantasy matchup grades in these two. Hooks, I gave a B+, and Scudero got a C+. So Hooks is now starting to pull away with these advantages of being more productive. Fantasy-wise over the last 3 weeks, just the offense overall being better in the passing game, and the question marks at quarterback for San Jose State. Scudero does get one little thing here. Touchdowns in the red zone. Fresno gives them up 74.1% of the time, while Tulsa gives them up 68.2%. If San Jose State does get down in the red zone, I think it's going to be the running game that takes advantage of that red zone touchdown conversion rate. So that may not help Scudero. And the big one why I really like Hooks over Scudero, Tulsa's giving up 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Fresno State's giving up 5.8. So that is a pretty good advanced stat for Hooks, a kind of bad one for Scudero. That's why I had Hooks as my wide receiver 25 and Scudero as my wide receiver 91. So this one's kind of obvious, Andrew. I'm going to tell you, go with Hooks here. Scudero's way too risky to throw him in. I think you just have to forget about what he's been doing all year and just focus on what's been happening recently. The last question came from Jeremy on Substack, asking me to pick one tight end in a no PPR league. He is asking between Michael Trigg, Baylor taking on Houston, and Brody Foley, Tulsa taking on UAB. We talked about the Baylor passing matchup before. I'm kind of just average on the fence in this one. Like I said before, I don't know if Baylor's going to put up the 32 points that Vegas is calling on. And where Trigg really gets his fantasy value is in a PPR or a half PPR format. And Jeremy, you don't have that with him. So touchdowns might be hard to get. The yardage could be there, but the lack of touchdowns, the fact that I think the Vegas line is a little inflated, I'm not a big fan of. But I can't ignore that Trigg is fantasy productive. He has been over the last 3 weeks. I ranked him my tight end 11, so I'm still giving him some benefit of the doubt there. The fantasy matchup grade being a B is above average. It's kind of good. And then he's got two average stats: the 50% red zone touchdown rate and almost 7 yards per pass attempt allowed by Houston. But really, I'm kind of leaning Brody Foley. He's probably been one of the best fantasy tight ends as the year's gone on. He is my tight end 3 compared to Trigg as my tight end 11. The Vegas line of 34.5 points, I think, is more in line to what we could expect, whereas I think that Vegas line for Baylor is a little inflated. And then every other advanced stat is better for Foley. Foley has a B+ fantasy matchup grade. Trigg has a B. Foley has 2.3 passing touchdowns allowed per game. Trigg has 1.1. Foley has red zone touchdown conversion rate of 78.7% of the time compared to the 50 for Trigg. And yards allowed per pass attempt, Foley has 10, Trigg has 6.9. I think this is a no-brainer, Jeremy. Get Foley in your lineup here and just trust with the process and the stats. I think it should be more productive for you. And he's the best chance I think you have of scoring a touchdown as well. All right, guys, I want to thank everybody here for tuning in. Those were my selections for this week's Start Em, Sit Em podcast and my opinions on your submitted questions. There is no article that I'm going to link down below this week. For those of you on YouTube and on Spotify, normally I would be doing that so you could catch the submitted question show, but we don't need to do that. I've given it to you all in one show here because this is my commitment to everyone that's been supporting me throughout this year, and I want to reward anyone who wants to get a taste of what my premium subscriptions, what those subscriptions offer here. So also here, guys, this is the last week of the season. I am going to put out one podcast episode on Saturday, a quick little one. You're going to have to tune in to see what it's about. Not going to give any hints. But this is the last Start Em, Sit Em for the year. It's the last, I'm going to say, real heavy duty podcast for the year. I want to thank all of you guys for supporting the channel all year long, for supporting the website. I've gotten good reviews back that people really like the brand change from Let Purple Rain to College Fantasy Rain. I want to thank you for those compliments as well, guys. But I want to thank you guys for just all your support. I mean, you guys are the ones who are allowing me to keep doing this work, guys. And so from the bottom of my heart, guys, thank you so much. Best of luck, everybody, in your fantasy championship games. I really want you guys to go out there and get a championship this week. Thanks for joining the College Fantasy Rain podcast. Your CFF Rain starts here.